God is love. It's a short verse, but it is so powerful. It's the first thing we teach our kids in kids' church, and if you have been around a football game, you have seen the guy with the John 3:16 banner in the end zone who's been trying to tell you that same message. And so it makes sense that if God is love, and that's the foundation of everything else, that love is hardwired into creation. How things are supposed to work is based on God's love, and that includes you and me. In fact, our purpose and our way of life is supposed to be centered on love. Jesus was talking in front of a crowd, and there was a group there that wanted to try and trap him. They were the experts in the law. They were the ones who told everybody else, this is why you're here, and this is how you're supposed to go about doing that. And they wanted to try and catch him and trap him in some way. And this is that exchange that went down. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. In other words, love is it. But we have a problem, because most of us don't know what love really looks like or what it really is, especially practically. And especially when so many of us walk around as these emotionally immature creatures. Because emotional maturity has nothing to do with your age. It doesn't matter how old you are. You could still be a 4-year-old emotionally and spiritually. You have to deal with things in order to mature. And one of the things you have to deal with is what love really looks like. But since we don't know, we let other people give us their definitions, and we tend to take them on. Like questions about, how do I love women in my community the best? How do I love immigrants? What does it look like to love a spouse? What does it look like to love kids in schools? We let other people tell us what that's supposed to look like. Political parties, cable news, and memes have all the answers for us, and we almost subconsciously accept them because we don't know any better. And so we're formed by what we are taking in. We're also formed by the fact that we have so many unhealthy examples about what love looks like. Even in good families, there are things that aren't quite right when it comes to how we love each other. Whether it becomes about how you deal with a disagreement, or if somebody doesn't agree with you, then it has to be a personal attack, or maybe you just think others exist so that you can get what you want from them. And so if they don't give you what you want, then you just ditch them and you leave them behind because they aren't meant for you. And so we have this misformed and misinformed love. And when we live like that, well, the kind of love we have stunts our growth because it isn't the kind that God has designed. And it destroys our witness about who He is, because we still claim that we know this God who is love while living lives that do not look like His. Because love apart from God always turns inward. Our culture turns itself in on itself. Our own hearts will turn in on ourselves when left to their own devices, because in the end, we believe that we are it. The world, the universe, revolves around me. I mean, just think about how you respond to other people's pain. Have you ever walked into a room and somebody is crying? It could be somebody you know or somebody you don't know, either way. But somebody's there and you walked in and everything was going great for you, and there was somebody else's pain right in front of your face. How did you respond to that? It's one of the most awkward situations in the world, to walk into a place where somebody is hurting and crying out and you don't know what's going on and you don't know how to deal with it. And so a lot of us act like we don't even see it, right? We just kind of look around like this, awkward, like, is there anybody else here? What am I supposed to do? And if we see a way to get out, maybe back the way we came, or to kind of go a little bit wider around the side and go around it, we will do that because we don't want whatever's going on over there to mess up with the center of our world. Or maybe you just deal with relationships transactionally. Like, I'll scratch your back, but you've got to scratch mine too. And if you'll scratch my back without me having to do anything for you, even better. Maybe that's even one reason why so many of us are horrible at voicing our own needs, about sharing the things that we need, the things that are burdening us, the things that we need help with. Because if I tell you that and you help me with it, well, then I don't want to feel obligated to you in some way. Like, well, you did this for me, now I've got to return the favor somehow. And we don't like that feeling of owing somebody else when we're the center of the universe. When I'm the center of the universe and my love gets turned inward, it shapes how you see other people, right? You can't help but have that be the case. Many of us got married where we got together and we had this beautiful ceremony, and part of the ceremony was you go up and there's these 2 candles that are lit, usually by the mothers of the bride and the groom, and then there's 1 candle in the middle. And you come up and you take your candle and your spouse takes the other candle, and you go and together you touch the middle one and light it and combine the flames into one to symbolize this incredible relationship where 2 have become 1. But you don't usually stop to answer this question. You 2 have become 1, right? Okay, which one? Which one did you choose to become? And we tend to work out in the first couple of years of marriage the answer to that, because we both go into it thinking, well, the one that we are going to become is me. And so we think that our relationship with our spouse is going to be wonderful and beautiful because they're going to do the things that we expect them to do, and we're going to have the plans that I expect them to have, and we're going to buy the groceries I want them to buy, and wear the clothes that I want them to wear, and find the place to live that I want to live in. All that stuff works itself out because I've decided I'm the one. Other people are supposed to be who I want them to be. Which is why you and I get mad when other people don't act like that. When they go against what we think they should do, or when they believe something different than we believe, we get upset about it. I mean, just take this quick test. This is a political season, so this works really well. Think about the person that you didn't vote for in the last election, or you're not voting for now. How do you feel about them? You think they're a good person, but just have some disagreements, or is there more to it? What about the people who voted for the person you didn't vote for? I mean, you can make this about any issue, right? It's not just politics. It's not just other people's beliefs. It's also like when you're having an argument in your family about where you're going to have dinner. Because you're right and everybody else is wrong. In fact, a lot of times it's not even that they're wrong, but because they're pushing up against you as the center of the universe, they're not just wrong, they're evil. This is how we try and love people. I mean, it may not be intentional, but we treat people like objects, something to use, like a car. You're here to get me where I need to go, and then once you've gotten me as far as you can, I'm going to trade you in for a newer model. Or maybe even like a tissue. I need you to come and help wipe up this mess, but once that mess is wiped up, you're too messy for me, so I can just toss you in the trash. Maybe you need to check yourself on that too. Like the next time you go out to eat, is it going to be like all the other times? I mean, how many of you, when you go out to eat, you learn the name, just the name of your server? I got convicted of this several years ago. I had a friend of mine, he's kind of a mentor. His name's Kerry Willis. And I would go to eat with him, and we would go different places. And it didn't matter where we went. If we went someplace that he went regularly, he knew everybody's names. He knew where they were from. He knew what was going on in their life. If we went somewhere that he didn't know anybody, by the time we were done, he not only had he learned our server's name, but he had gotten their family history. And he had been able some way and somehow to pray for them about something that was going on in their lives. Because he wasn't just concerned about what kind of service he was receiving. Did they fill up the drinks fast enough? Did the food come out hot? He was concerned about them. They weren't just objects. They were people. Or maybe this is better for you. Do you expect your kids or your spouse or your friends to be the picture you have of them in your own heads? Or do you have space for them to be who God has created them to be? Even church people, how about this one? Do you do something for somebody else because you're looking at them like a project? Like, I'm going to go over to my neighbors, I'm going to help rake their leaves, and then I'm going to invite them to church because I want them to come with me. All of that's good, but what happens if they say no? If they say no, do you like, well, that project didn't work, let's go on to the next project? Or do you still stay and treat them with respect and dignity because they're your friend and your neighbor? You see, I love it when people fit my plans, but I get frustrated when they don't because I don't know how to love them well. I don't know how to love them like God does. Because God's love lived in us is qualitatively different than the love we tend to see defined around us. You see, where we've turned our love inward, God's love gets poured outward to others. God saw the distance between you and I, between us and Him, and how great it was, and how we could never cross it, and so He bridged it for us with Himself. There's a song out called 1,000 Names. It's newer, and the songwriter was talking about the story behind it and how they were trying to squeeze in as many different names of God into the song in 4.5 minutes as possible. Because every name reveals a bridge God built to us. Otherwise, we'd never know Him or that name. The only reason we know anything about God is because He loved us enough to come to us and share Himself with us. See, loving people that are different than we are, people that frustrate our plans, or just frustrate us in general, that's how God asks us to love. And it takes maturity to be able to do it, to be able to look beyond ourselves to someone else. And it begins by changing how you see them. Not as objects to use and discard for your own plans, but seeing each and every person, even the person that you have had the most negative things to say about out loud, on Facebook, or in your own mind. And realize that that person is made in the image of God. That person made in the image of God is worthy of being treated with dignity and respect simply because they exist, not because of anything they've ever done. And that your Lord, the one who loves you and hopefully that you love back, loves that person enough to die for them. Are you willing to even be uncomfortable, to be inconvenienced for somebody else that God is willing to die for? That's the kind of love that will help your life and your spirituality grow to all that God's intended it to be. But loving others like God loves us looks practically different than how most of us deal with love in this life and how we've learned to deal with other people. I mean, usually we are trying to help shape other people into what we want them to be. And God says, I'm going to let other people be who I've created them to be, not who you want them to be. So how do I let go of these desires to see another person as I want them to be instead of how God wants them to be? Well, one thing you can do really easily, I say easy because it's easy to say, not easy to do, is to listen. I mean, really, really listen to people. Jesus' brother James, in James chapter 1:19, tells us that we're supposed to be quick to hear and slow to speak. Too often it's the other way around, isn't it? Because when I hear somebody, when I'm really listening to them and not just listening to or in order to make whatever my next argument is going to be, I start to connect with who they really are. I start to see them differently because I'm seeing the world through their eyes instead of everything being centered on mine. I can also enter into where they are. You know, Jesus talks about ways that we are blessed. We're blessed when we mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice. It's very different than coming into to see someone and even maybe letting them cry out about what's going on or hear about how rough their day is and saying, oh, that's nice. Now let's talk about my day, and just skipping over them completely. It's being with them in the midst of whatever they've got going on, because they're valuable enough to do that. And maybe don't try to manipulate them into who you want them to be or how you want them to act. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe giving half-truths so they'll go the way you want them to go. Maybe leaving out some information. We're really good at shame and guilting people into stuff, aren't we? Maybe leave all that stuff away and just speak truth out of your love for them so that they can choose for themselves what they need to do with that. You see, loving others well isn't just something that's required of us from the outside. It's wired into this creation, right? And it's directly tied into our relationship with God. I want to read a little bit from Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, what Pete Scazzero says about this, because I think it's important. As emotionally mature Christian adults, we recognize that loving well is the essence of true spirituality. This requires that we experience connection with God, with others, and with other people. God invites us to practice His presence in our daily lives. At the same time, He invites us to practice the presence of people within an awareness of His presence in our daily relationships, and the two are rarely brought together. Jesus' profound contemplative prayer life with His Father resulted in a contemplative presence with people. Love is to reveal the beauty of another person to themselves, wrote Jean Vanier. Jesus did that with each person He met. This ability to really listen and pay attention to people was at the very heart of His mission. It could not help but move Him to compassion. In the same way, out of His contemplative time with God, we too are invited to be prayerfully present to people, revealing their beauty to themselves. The religious leaders of Jesus' day, the church leaders of that time, never made that connection. They were diligent, zealous, absolutely committed to having God as Lord of their lives. They memorized the entire books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They prayed 5 times a day. They tithed all their income and gave money to the poor. They evangelized, but they never delighted in people. They did not link loving God with the need to be diligent, zealous, and absolutely committed to growing in their ability to love other people. For this reason, they criticized Jesus repeatedly for being a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. He delighted in people and life too much. Jesus refused to separate the practice of the presence of God from the practice of the presence of people. When pushed to the wall to separate this unbreakable union, Jesus refused. He summarized the entire Bible for us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Remember, this is what's hardwired into us. So when we live it out as God desires, something gets unleashed. Something holy gets unleashed. God bridges the gap between us and the people that we are delighting in, the people we are being present in, the people we are loving well. He bridges the gap with His presence, and He makes it a sacred place. One of the most memorable times that I experienced this, because it was something new, was when I was working for City Union Mission in Kansas City. One of my responsibilities was to go on home visits. So these were people who had come through the homeless shelter, had been given some training and some help, and had been able to find a place to live in the community and were starting to reestablish their lives. And I got to go and kind of check in. And I was the number 2. So there's somebody who was in charge, and then me. I'm kind of coming along for the ride to just kind of get the experience. And we go and visit a girl who's 20 years old, several years younger than I was at the time. And her history and her current circumstances couldn't have been further from mine. Different ethnicities, different religious backgrounds, different family backgrounds, different living conditions, all of this stuff. And I'll be honest, just walking into her place made me uncomfortable. I'm looking all around when we walk up to the door of her apartment to see who was going to jump out and get me, because it wasn't in a good neighborhood. And we go in and we sit down, and she shares real quickly what's going on in her life. She's incredibly open with us, and she'd never met me before, but she was just sharing whatever she had going on, and the real stuff. It wasn't long before we learned that her mother had, just this last week, overdosed. She'd recently been assaulted coming home from work. And because she'd missed a couple days recovering from that, her work had let her go, and now she didn't know where she was going to find another job. She just started crying uncontrollably. And like so many, I'm like, when am I getting out of here? I mean, this is just supposed to be a quick, easy stop. Say hi. Do you still have a place to live? Do you have food? Okay, let's go. And she's pouring all this out, and she starts talking about how hard it is for her not to go back to using in that moment. And the pro that I'm with, the number one, is more worked up than I am. And she's looking around, and she tosses this whole thing to me. It's like, oh, Brad here, well, he's got something to say. And I didn't know what to do. I freaked out a little bit, to be honest, in my head. So I did the only thing I knew to do at the time. I moved up from my seat, and I went and I sat next to her. And I just sat there. I sat next to her as she cried. I listened as she talked more about what was going on. Every once in a while, I would try to connect her to the real life that can be found in Jesus Christ. And I just did that. And in making her a person that needed to be loved instead of a job, instead of trying to make her, well, just kind of suck it up and get yourself together so you can be what I need you to be, just letting her be who she was in the moment. In the midst of that, God showed up. I mean, that living room in the projects became a holy place. And in the midst of that, something happened to her. She didn't stop crying, but her tears switched from despair and agony to tears of joy. As somewhere in that moment, she felt completely released from the addiction that was calling out to her. She still had all the problems she had to deal with, but that one was gone, and that was what she needed in that place, for God to come and do that work in her. Something sacred was unleashed, because without even realizing it, we were able to love her well. What kind of love do you want to have define your life? Loving like God will result in you growing, and it is something that's going to keep growing in you more and more and more as you become more like Him. But there's a big step that has to happen for you to be able to experience that. You have to be willing to lay yourself down. You have to be willing to get yourself out of the center of your own universe. And you have to give that space to the person who deserves it, the one who loves you perfectly and gave Himself for you. You have to be willing to surrender to Him. He'll bridge the gap between you. He'll reshape what it means for you to love as you keep giving yourself to Him. And if you do that, then there's relationships. There's conversations that are waiting for you when you leave this place right now. They won't just be simply things you do or people you see. They will be sacred moments where the presence of God will show up. Lord, I pray that you would help us to surrender to you completely. That our lives would be about nothing else but loving you with all that we are and loving others as we love ourselves. And we won't let anyone define what that means but you. You will tell us what it means to really love. And you will show us how that practically looks in our lives. Because instead of being isolated and alone and frustrated because nobody's being who I want them to be. I'm going to love them and help them see the beauty that is in them because you have placed it there. That they might be who you have created them to be, and I might be who you have created me to be more fully each and every day, because love is what defines my life. Help us, Lord, to look like you, for you are love. Amen.